Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome back to our online Sunday school. This morning we're going to be looking about a parable that is found in Luke chapter 8 verse 19 to 14. I'm going to read it and then we'll go into the lesson. So Jesus starts to speak to certain of these men, and he uses a parable to teach them that we need God's forgiveness. But when we go to God, it is important as to what our attitude is when we go to God. And he spake this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves, that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and praised thus with himself, I thank thee that I'm not like these other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like the publican. I fast twice in the week, I give tithes and all that I possess. Then Jesus spoke about the other man. He said, and the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up much as his eyes upon heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Now, you know, boys and girls, when you've done something wrong, what do your parents want you to do? They want you to say sorry, don't they? Now, Jesus told this parable of the 2 men and the way they prayed. And they had different attitudes when they went to God for forgiveness. Now, when you go to your parents and you have to say sorry, it's your heart and your attitude that's going to count, isn't it? So when you've done something wrong and you go to your parents and you go with a bad heart and a bad attitude and you go, oh, sorry, well, that's not really the right attitude to have. So when we come and we go to our parents for forgiveness and to say sorry, we've got to go with a humble heart, a truthful heart, and a right attitude. And we need to be truly sorry for what we've done. So Jesus used this illustration of 2 men. So first of all, he used the illustration of a Pharisee. And this man, he thought so much of himself. When he prayed, he stood before God and he was bragging about how good he was and about all his good works and how superior he was, that he even said that he was even better than the publican. So we see that the attitude of this first man, it wasn't a rightful attitude. He came before God with a boastful and a proud heart, and that wouldn't be the right attitude to come before God. Then Jesus spake about the second man who was a publican. Now, a publican was a tax collector, and tax collectors weren't really well liked in the Bible times because they were known for stealing and taking money off people, and they were hated. And when he came before God, he came with a very humble heart, and it's because he was ashamed. He was so ashamed for what he had done and the wrong that he had done to people. And he was so sorry when he came before God. And as we read in the Bible, we see that he actually smote his breast and he said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So we see when this man came, the second man came before God, he had a really sorry, he was really sorry for what he had done. So his attitude was a good attitude when he came before God. And we know that he was a sinner, and he realized that he didn't deserve God's goodness and God's forgiveness. Now, boys and girls, not one of us deserve God's goodness because of our sin and our choices of sin. But we know that God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross so that we could go to heaven. And, you know, we still do sin, but it's so wonderful that we can humbly go before God and we can talk to him and we can tell him about our mistakes and our weaknesses and our sins. and we can truly go before Him and ask Him to forgive us. Now, when we look at these different attitudes of the men, we have the first man that was so boastful and so proud, and then we have the other man that was humble when he came before God. Now, which man do you want to be like when you come before God? Do you want to be like the first man, the Pharisee, who was proud and boastful and almost like he didn't need God because he thought he was so good? Or are you going to have a humble attitude like the second man that came before God? He was ashamed at his sinfulness, and he was so humble when he came before God. And I think it's so important for us to have a good attitude before God. Now, boys and girls, I want to encourage you. If you are truly a child of God, and there's been a time in your life when you've placed your faith and trust in what Jesus has done for you, then it is important to have time to pray to God. And I would encourage you to take time before you start the day to pray to God. Ask Him to forgive you from any sin that's within your life, any thought or deed. And then at night time before you go to bed, you can also do the same. Pray that God will forgive you. And there's many things that we can pray for. And we can pray for our families, and we can pray for others. And even for the time that we're going through, we can ask God to continue to undertake for us. But I think it's so important that when we come before God, our attitude has to be right. And the same with our parents as well. We need to have a right and good, humble attitude when we come before our parents. So I thank God for His goodness and for His forgiveness. And I trust that we'll be like that second man, that we will come before God with a humble heart. And just like He said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. When we come before God, we've got to realize that we need Him in every area of our life. And I pray that you'll trust in God, knowing that He is good and He is so faithful towards us. I trust that you've enjoyed the story today, and that you will consider the attitude of your heart when you come to God, and also with your parents as well, that you'll have a good attitude, and that God will bless and will hear your prayers. I pray that God will just bless you, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye. God bless.